All right, welcome back. You're watching Morning Express, and it's great to have you with us. 8 minutes per 7 a.m. Good morning. In case you're just joining us, we're plugging in on this very auspicious day. It happens to be the International Youth Day 2021, and we've just had a discussion centered on how we can plug in terms of the policies of the country to sort of grab the future as the youthful population. Let's shift focus right now. On Thursday, we talk about social issues, and this month, we focused on the boy child, the male generation in society. And today's discussion is skewed around the fact, are we equipping the men enough to sort of take on life's responsibilities as the head of the family, quote unquote, who mentors this boy child at an onset early level in order for them to mature and take up these responsibilities that society definitely expects them to. So in studio, I'm joined by an interesting panel, and I'll get right into it. Thank you so much for making time. Virtually, I'm joined by Simon Bevy, who's the founder of Man Enough. It's an 8-week empowerment program that sort of empowers men to grab their future. And right here in studio, I'm joined by Rosemary Kinuthia, who's not a new face to the show, Director of Partnerships and Programs. Thank you so much for your time. And I'm also joined by Kagwe Kibugu, who is a banker and a mental health advocate. Gentlemen and lady, thanks for your time. So we're talking about an issue that is close to the heart of many men in this country, and women as well, because at times they're affected. Are today's men equipped to handle family life and responsibilities? Rosemary, I'd like to begin with you. Are they?
I would say no, but not entirely, because even those that are equipped are actually just hanging there. Yeah?
Yeah.
And the reason is a lot of things have changed. When you look back at where we are coming from, a young boy as early as a one-day child used to have a lot of society celebration. And as they grew up, there was a tendency of the entire society celebrating as he grew up, and a lot of affirmation. And with time, they kind of took responsibility very seriously. Unlike what happens today, whereby we've become so individualistic, and that my child is my child. And therefore, taking responsibility, that young man can only learn responsibility from that small space that I'm offering him. So I would say not entirely.
Okay, not entirely. Kagwe, do you hold the same opinion? Are we equipped enough to deal with life's responsibilities?
Contrary to her opinion, which I do respect, I do believe that men are ready for responsibility. I believe that there's an innate desire for men to be able to have a family, to nurture a family, and I feel like we are able to see this in a large majority of the community today. You know, you see this in the good leaders that we have. You see this in the good fathers, in the good relationships that we have, the healthy relationships that we have. Where I do agree with her is that there is a challenge, a growing challenge, especially with the young men today, whereby there is a growing level of uncertainty because of the changing dynamics in society and the roles that men are expected to play because of the growing influence that the girl child is having in today's society, which I agree for, and I believe, you know, gender equality is something that we must continue to promote in today's society. However, I do feel that men are ready. I do feel that it is something that we desire and that we want to be able to achieve successfully, and especially coming from a generation where, you know, the older generation was a lot harder to have a healthier environment to harness, you know, the families that we're trying to breed today. So I would agree, and I would say that yes, I do think men are ready for responsibility and are ready to handle families.
Okay, Simon Bevy, I know you do a lot of work in terms of empowering these men, but from where we sit right now in terms of this particular generation, are we ready? Are we equipping these young men enough to perhaps face the future responsibilities, life responsibilities, and not just at a parent level, perhaps at a society level as well? What's your take on this?
Well, thank you. I'm glad to be here. But what I would say is, yes, men are excited about taking their responsibilities by and large, but I wouldn't say they are well equipped. For this reason, with the programs that we are having, especially about the boy child, we do the Boys to Men program, and we do also the Man Enough program. A lot of men are coming to us saying, I want to do the right thing. I want to take up the responsibility, but I don't feel skilled enough. I don't feel like I know what to do in certain areas. In some areas, they are doing well. In others, they are struggling. And I think for me, it comes from three things. Number one, just the lack of enough mentorship through fathering. That a lot of the men or a lot of the young men do not have fathers that they look up to. Quite a significant number. Fathers who have held their hand and passed on the baton of masculinity and sat them down and socialized them into what it means to be a man. So a lot of them are looking out for that because they don't feel they have gotten enough. But secondly, I think as a society, we had an assumption that the men don't need help. They're okay because anyway, they've been in charge, so we say, and so they don't need help. So we have not had many programs or places where men could hang out and get socialized a lot more or equipped in playing out their masculinity roles. And lastly, I think what was alluded to earlier is the lack of structured socialization. I think in earlier days, the rites of passage and the sitting around the fireplace were places where a lot of men would have discussions about their social responsibilities and relational responsibilities. But we don't have much conversations around that. And I think that's why there's a lot of hungering and reaching out for men to say, where can I find this skill on fathering or on marriage or on this other aspect. So we are beginning to get there. I think there's a lot of now understanding and awareness and a lot more programs coming up in different places. We're not there yet, but we are on the right road.
Okay, let me start this. Mtoto mleavyo ndivyo akuavyo. So you cannot train a tree while it's old, of course. So at what point should we start plugging in terms of making sure we bring forth to this generation men who are well equipped with the task at hand? Rosemary, as you add your voice to that, at what point should we start mentoring the boy child? Because Simon Bevy pointed out socialization structure. There's no time this time round, especially with this generation, where we'll sit by the fireplace and interact with older men. Perhaps they're out there struggling to find the day-to-day livelihoods, of which is part of their job, quote unquote. Yeah.
I think for me, there's a very big difference between being ready or willingness to and having the ability and the skill to perform the task. There is a very big difference.
Okay.
If you talk to a lot of men and youthful male gender, there is a desire to own family. There is a desire to get employment. There is a desire to earn livelihood. The question would be, does that person have the skill and the ability or the opportunity to take that task on? And that is, I think that is where we kind of we are disagreeing. However, the desire to want to perform or to deliver is a human nature thing. Everybody wants. But I think the opportunities and the skill is what is lacking. You just asked, when do we start mentorship? I think from what I think is that as early as possible. However, I had a discussion with someone actually just yesterday, and we were bringing about we need a lot of mentorship matters boy-child. My argument would be mentorship is just one of the many things that we require when it comes to boy-child. Remember, if I mentor a young person and that young person does not have a ground to stand on, it doesn't matter how much mentorship I do. It doesn't matter how much I try to restore self-worth of that particular young man. It does not matter how much I try to boost optimism for that particular young man. It should be a full cycle. Mentorship being one of them. Societal perception on boy-child should be another. Structures, laws, and policies should also be in place. It should be an entire cycle. That is the only way you're actually going to equip this particular person without necessarily leaving one area out. And what we are suffering today is that we are really pushing the idea of mentorship in terms of boys. A lot of people are actually blaming the boy child because he's refused to take responsibility or he has no persistence for anything. But I think he's just a victim of circumstance. He's purely a victim of circumstance. People should be sitting in boardrooms following up on matters, policies, and laws. What is it that we have that does not enable the boy child or the male gender to pursue his interest and ambition? Do we amend that? I think those are things that we are supposed to look at wholeheartedly without necessarily focusing on one area.
So what's the missing link? Quite briefly, still with you. Well, what's the missing link? What haven't we gotten right over the last couple of years that we can actually change in order to benefit the young generation?
One is that we need to accept the fact that the society has changed. The way we used to bring our boys has totally changed. The affirmation the boy child had from tradition and from our culture has changed. And therefore, our perception of him should equally change. What we expect of him in terms of responsibilities should also change. If my dad was to take care of my mom and us, it was expected of him then. But today, my husband would not entirely be responsible of taking care of me and my children. It should be a 50-50.
Okay. And that's a conversation I want to talk about, expound before you continue. Kagwe, when we talk about men and finances, when we talk about tradition and culture having changed, men were traditionally the providers. So when a man has no funds for the family, perhaps low self-esteem creeps in, goes to extreme cases of crime and other ways to sort of deal with that pressure. So from where you sit, is it time for that 50-50 conversation? Because not everyone prescribes to that, of course.
I do agree. I think there is definitely space for that conversation to be had. But Jesse, I also want to reiterate that we also don't live in a perfect society. And it's very difficult to be able to have a society that has the perfect balance. I believe that there has to be a time, there has to be a place for us to have a conversation where people are comfortable with understanding that we can both earn the same amount of money, that we can both be able to go 50-50 on different bills, on different costs, but it must be accepted within society. I would like to briefly touch on the question that you just asked previously. And I would just like to make the point that for a long time this conversation has been had in terms of when is the right time to mentor the boy child, right? And we must understand that policies are implemented by people, right? And the people being the older generation. The older generation have a certain way of thinking that may perhaps not be the way the upcoming generation are currently thinking, right? So I'll give you a brief example. Previously, as I was doing my preparation for the show, I asked a number of people who were my age, perhaps around 30 or so, and I asked them, do you have a mentor? And almost zero of them said yes, right? So you have 30 out of the 30 people I asked, which is almost 100%, who said they have no mentors. So what they do is that when they seek or are looking for information, they go to older brothers, people that you'd call your older brother, because we don't have a culture of mentors. And until the older generation start to understand that they need to seek out and look for us as young men, instead of us as young men seeking them out because we do not know what essentially we're trying to look for or be guided towards, then I feel like we'd have a better, a better answer to that question.
Okay, Mbevi, add your voice to that particular question. The right time to mentor a boy child with the generation shift as he's just prescribed. What say you about this?
Well, I think what I would say is right from birth, of course, a child needs to begin to see an example of a male person around them because they begin to see what they are becoming as they get to 3, as they get to 5. But psychologically, it's around preteen into early teenage that a child begins to identify more closely with their gender. So what I advise a lot of parents when we train, and especially single parents where there's no masculine figure around them, is that around 9, 10, 11 years, a boy begins to ask, so who am I? And begins to want to identify with a male figure. And that's the time that the father needs to get a lot closer. Even for me, though I've been there for my children, it's around my son. It's around 11, 12. I also allowed, 2 other mentors to work with him because I wanted him to have a different experience of masculinity and connection thereof. So I would say as early as possible, but of course, if one missed out, like myself, I missed out on that because my father died when I was 8 years old, when I was just beginning to long for that connection with a male figure. And unfortunately, through high school, I got a little bit of mentorship here and there. But into college, I was still yearning for that male connection to understand what it means to be a man, to get some skills of living out my masculinity. So I wasn't as lucky. I got a bit here and there. But of course, that shouldn't be the case for those who are growing up today. I think we need to have those programs or opportunities or connections for mentorship right from preteen all the way up. But even younger, they begin to look out to see their type, how they live out, how they do life right when they are young. So it needs to be a lifelong thing, I believe.
Ted, add your voice to this men and finances issue, because at times it brings a masculinity crisis. Let's paint a scenario where the man is sort of struggling and perhaps the woman in the family is earning more than the spouse now. The wife earns more, so it's perceived you're less powerful in terms of she won't respect me. At times we hear such statements. So in terms of that masculinity crisis, how do we maneuver through it?
Well, I think what we need to say to us men, a lot has changed, and a lot of us men, especially the men between 20s and 30s, are probably those who are married, probably married to someone who may earn a lot more than them. And I think the idea is for us to relax and realize it's not about who earns more. Sometimes we say E for effort, F for effort. And you find some men are putting in a lot of effort, but they are not getting in as much. And we need to understand that society has changed, and we shouldn't put too much pressure on ourselves as men. And to say, if I don't have more money than her, or if I can't provide at a certain level, then I'm not man enough. Being man enough is a lot more than what you put on the table. As long as, of course, you're not lazing around and waiting to be fed or to be supported. So number one is let's not put too much pressure on ourselves because of the reality changes nowadays. But number two, I would appeal to the ladies not to put too much pressure on us. I have handled 3 cases during this COVID situation. Where some ladies were threatening to quit on a man in marriage because he wasn't earning anymore. His business collapsed, and he was trying, but he wasn't getting much on the table. And the women were feeling like, I can't live with you because you're not providing anymore. Of course, those are extreme cases. I think we need to work together, not to put too much pressure on the man, because the way society is now, we provide together. Yes, a man needs to provide a certain leadership in the relationship that is expected of him, but not having enough money or more money than the lady in in the relationship, that shouldn't be a cause for stressing the man a lot more. I think we need to understand things have changed, and we shouldn't put pressure on ourselves as men. Which is what then creates that crisis, because we define ourselves a lot by what we produce, more than who we are within and the qualities and values that we bring to the table. And society, let's not put too much pressure on the man, especially ladies, so that we can work things out together with the changed realities that we have on ourselves right now.
Okay, Rosemary, you're the only lady in this panel. So are women guilty of putting too much pressure into men when it comes to this men and finances topic?
I think, let me just take 2 steps backwards and say this, is that our society has this mindset that the man is supposed to be the provider.
The head of the family.
The head of the family. And it is unfortunate because the same society has changed its mindset and now believes I can be a pilot as a woman. The same society has changed its mindset that I can be a president in this society. But the same society has refused to accept that I can take care of my jobless husband. You get? So I think it is selective way of looking at things. And it is, Pastor Mbevi talks about men should relax when you are not able to provide. Relaxing is not an option for men. I do not know, but to be honest, in this modern society, it is not an option. 2, he says that actually ladies should understand when things are thick. Maybe we do not have that ability to understand. That's the reality. Because men have taken care of their families, including their wives, since beginning of time, without complaints. Yeah? But if I have to take care of my husband for 3 days, it will be on social media the 5th day.
Okay.
You understand?
Yeah.
So I think we need to be fair and try to change mindset where it is required. I always say this, the amount you invest in a boy child should be equal to your expectation on him. He's not a miracle worker.
Interesting. Kagwe, I add your voice to this, because at the end of the day, I mean, a woman perhaps should be open to supporting a jobless husband. But the question is, will that jobless husband want to be supported? That's where toxic masculinity at times approaches and enters that particular circle. What say you?
I think that in today's society where, we are more liberal, where there's more information that is easier to access, I think it's a lot difficult, especially speaking as a young man, for us to relax. I feel like there's an increasing amount of pressure in us to be able to perform to the expectations that are changing within our society. I also feel that it's also important that as much as there is a growing change and a growing expectation, I also feel like that there should be more room for conversation, that men should be allowed to be vulnerable. I feel like that is something that we do not have a conversation enough about, and I feel like having come down from a place where, weakness is not allowed to be showed, where we're not allowed to portray certain emotions, I believe that conversations like this need to be had more often. There needs to be more space for these conversations. And with that, I believe that we'll come to more of an understanding. But now with social media and, the access to information, I believe that, men today are very prone to conforming to certain lifestyles that they may perhaps not be able to, afford, which is causing a lot of miscommunication between the two genders. So I feel like it's very difficult in this period to sort of just rest on our laurels, especially seeing what we have from previous generations. And I feel like it's a catch-22. I feel like it's a catch-22 that we need to talk more about.
Okay.
Yeah.
But even as we do that, let's talk with you about society's assumptions. Perhaps the assumptions of the older generation are totally different with what's going on currently. That assumption that men don't need help, perhaps crying is a sign of weakness, when it comes to finances, not being able to provide definitely shows you're not man enough at times. So what assumptions are currently driving these issues that are beleaguering men in the society, and how do we deal with them from a young man point of view, Kagwe?
I think that we need to form more groups and have more spaces where men are able to come together and talk. I think Pastor, what he's been doing over the number of years with Man Enough has been fantastic for a lot of young men coming up. Personally, I have a lot of friends and cousins who have gone through the program, who went in with a certain way of thinking and came out with a very different way of thinking. I also think that we also need to normalize therapy. I think therapy is also a very big thing that needs to be normalized within men. It allows people to be vulnerable, to let go of past incidences and traumas that they may have, and also come out and be better in society. And I also want to touch on the fact that a lot of men are told, you know, you're not allowed to be weak. Weakness is emotion is a sign of weakness, you know. And I disagree to that point, because I feel like emotion is a very big part of who we are as human beings. And I think it's critical to understand what emotions you're feeling, what, you know, experiences you've gone through, to be able to be a better man for not just yourself, but also for a family that you'd like to raise, and the relationships that you have around you. So with that said, I feel like there needs to be more conversations that are had, especially within younger groups. And I feel like the demeanor about being weak, because you're not able to be in touch with your emotions, is something that we need to demystify, and something that we need to normalize. But hopefully the girl child would not look at us as as being weak.
Yeah, continue.
Yeah.
Rosemary, briefly.
I think there's something that I would want to add in terms of men expressing their emotions. We have three categories of men. There is the older generation, that will probably be our fathers, and I'm not youth, so you can imagine probably how old my dad is. And that is a generation that was affirmed from the word go. They had proper structures from birth all the way up. And they were given the total support, because probably that was a system where it actually uploaded the boy child from birth. So that is a generation that is different. Then we have another generation, which I think now it is us, who have 80% of our upbringing also kind of affirmed us. And this generation is what I normally call the donkey generation. A donkey generation is a generation where I will take care of my children, I will take care of my parents, and I will take care of my children. That is a donkey generation. You're actually struggling. Then you have this other generation which does not have a clue how to even take care of their own children. They have absolutely no clue. So the reason why we have a lot of, there's a very big gap between these generations. And what happens is that if you engage men of older generation, now our dads and probably guys who are less, probably younger, these are guys who are affirmed, and they do not understand why a boy should cry. They do not understand why a boy would lazy around. They will not understand why, why a boy would be beaten by a girl. They are resistant to this. And these are the guys who are sitting in boardrooms. You go talk to them about the crisis of the boy child. I was like, you have feminized our boys, you've made them weak and stuff like that. And that is why this agenda of boy child, ikienda huko juu, it gets, it gets a barrier, because these guys are coming from old school. Changing their mindset is like bending an old tree. It is very hard. So I think from where I come from, and he says, things have changed, and we also need to start changing our mindset. The fact that you are affirmed, the fact that you had mentors, the fact that you are applauded, the today generation that we have of 10 years, 13 years, 18 years, 25 years, have nothing of this, of that. So you should actually give them benefit of doubt and probably help them where you can. If you can't, you should not put them off.
Point them to the right direction.
Exactly.
Simon Bevy, we're talking about this intergenerational gap. Add your voice to this. Are there support structures in place? And if there are, But what exactly is the role of a man in this generation? Is it just to provide? Break it down for us.
Well, thank you. I think I also wanted to clarify what I said earlier. When I said men should relax and not put pressure on themselves, I wasn't saying that they sit on their laurels. I wasn't even saying that they lazy out. I think that was misunderstood a little earlier. But I was saying they shouldn't put pressure on themselves. We should come to a point where when you are doing your best and you're not getting enough money, then you don't put pressure on yourself and be a stressed man. I think that's what I was referring to. Just wanted to clarify that. But moving on to what you're saying and these support structures, I believe before I talk about men today and what's happening, the older men, I believe given the right spaces, what I call safe spaces, then you would see them begin to show vulnerability. I mean, I remember recently in one of our Man Enough programs, there was a man who was in his 80s. And of course, he was socializing to big men don't cry and that such kind of mentality. But we provided the kind of space where we were all vulnerable and speaking about what we were going through. And I remember him standing up and breaking down and crying before this crowd of about 30 men and beginning to share some of the pains that he was going through. So I think providing safe places for men, whatever generation is, then we'll bring them to a point where they get in touch with their own pain and issues, and they'll be able to openly, show emotion. If there's no judgment, if they don't feel that they're going to be judged, that they are not man enough. I think that's what men have always feared because of the socialization. But talking about the man today and support structures, I think we all need to work together to support the men. The mothers, and that's why we do one of our programs for mothers of sons, to say you also play a very important role in allowing your boy to show emotions and helping him to be able to deal with what he's feeling, and helping him name his emotions and realize it's okay. So mothers are good support structures for the growing young men. The fathers, of course, and then in schools. Thankfully, right now, we're beginning to see in schools a lot of programs that are happening for the boys. We are doing in quite a few schools. We're beginning to see banks even do programs. I am talking to a few corporates right now that have male programs in supporting the men because of what they are going through. These are very commendable efforts that are happening at work, in school, at home, in churches. I think we are doing very well in terms of building these support structures for the men. And I would say, let's keep doing it. Those of us in the workplaces who are leaders there, please let's provide places, because we have always provided places for women to speak through their issues. Let's as well provide spaces for men to be able to handle their issues. And let's all work together for the health of the men as we are working together for the health of the woman as well.
Bevi, before I let you go, what's the role of a man in today's generation? How do you break that down?
Okay, I think we can still use some of, let me say, for example, what we define fathers, and we say fathers need to be present. So one of our roles is to be present in relationships and make sure we're there as husbands, we're there as fathers, we are there in the differing relationships that we have. Provision is not our only preserve, but it's part of what we do. I mean, we can't sit back and say because the lady is providing, we cannot provide. We are co-providers, and provision is not just giving the money, it's also providing the vision for the relationship, for our children, and for where we are going. So it's just redefining what provision is. We're not the sole providers, but we are still providers. And then, of course, there's the protection. That there are different ways that we protect. Of course, now we don't protect the way our fathers protected, like putting, swords and pangas under our pillow to protect our family. We have the cops and security people to do that. But we still protect them socially. We still protect them in terms of making sure they're not exposed to what would destroy them, even gadgets and things like that. So in that sense, we are still still social protectors. We are still protectors in society, and that's still expected of us by our children and by the ladies that we work with. And then two last ones I would say is being a priest. And to me, a priest is about teaching values. I think fathers and men still need to mentor those who are growing up and teach them values. As fathers, we need to do that a lot. And in different places, we need to make sure the right values are being inculcated in the growing generation. Modeling those values as well in society is important. At work, at home, on the streets, the way we drive and all of that. And lastly is what I call being a prophet, speaking, calling out, the young man into masculinity and telling them who they are, calling out the young girl into femininity, because every girl is looking up to their dad to be able to affirm them in who they are becoming. And that's a psychological fact, especially around teenage and preteen. So playing those roles, being present in our differing relationships, being providers, not sole providers, but providers as well. Being protectors, social protectors, as we model that, being priests, modeling values and teaching values, socializing the next generation into values, and lastly, calling out and affirming what we are seeing in others around us, especially the young ones. I would say that's our role as men as we grow in different relationships.
So we have a workout out for us. Allow us to take a short break. When we come back, we'll be back with more on this. Not just the role of men, but are they being empowered enough? And what about those online calls for uplifting the young boy child generation due to perhaps being sidelined? Is this something that is actually reality? Stay with us. This and much more after the break.